Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to look at flowers in a way I guarantee you never have before. It all starts with a simple question from a scientist named G. Bell, a question with a truly shocking answer. What are flowers actually for? And let me tell you, it is not what you think.
Okay, so let's get right into it. Most of the flowers you see out there are hermaphroditic. That just means they have both the male parts, the ones that make pollen, and the female parts that have ovules, which, become seeds. So it seems like a pretty logical place to start to ask, does a flower split its energy and its resources evenly between those two jobs? Is it a 50-50 split?
Well, this is where things get weird. If we make that simple assumption that the pretty parts, the petals, the scent, the nectar, if we assume they help both the male and female functions equally, the math leads to a totally bizarre conclusion. See, you count the flower as a shared cost, and then the fruit as purely female. And all of a sudden, it looks like almost every plant on Earth is investing over 90% of its resources into being female. And that just doesn't make any sense.
Right, so this completely baffling outcome is what the researcher G. Bell called the paradox of secondary allocation in his 1985 paper. From an evolutionary standpoint, it was a real head-scratcher.
Bell looked at this and said, no way, this can't be right. This wasn't just some weird little calculation, it was a huge roadblock to understanding plant evolution. This idea that everything was so heavily female-biased, it just didn't fit with anything else we see in nature. He knew that the fundamental assumption had to be wrong, and that led him to a really radical new idea.
So, here it is. Here's Bell's incredibly elegant solution. And just get ready, because this idea completely flips our entire understanding of what a flower is right on its head.
Bell's hypothesis is this. A flower's beauty, its color, its fragrance, all the stuff that makes it attractive, isn't a shared asset at all. He argued that it's almost entirely in service of the flower's male function, which is getting its pollen out there to other plants. The logic here is just beautifully simple. Think about it. From the female side of things, how many pollinator visits do you really need? Just one, maybe two, and boom, all your ovules are fertilized. Job done. You've basically hit your ceiling for success. But for the male side, for spreading pollen, is there a limit? Absolutely not. Every single extra bee, every extra butterfly, means more of your pollen gets exported. So that means any investment in being showier beyond the absolute minimum is almost a pure benefit for the male function.
So here's the kicker. When you reclassify the flower as a primarily male organ, the math suddenly clicks into place. The flower's male investment balances out the fruit's female investment. And just like that, the paradox of these overwhelmingly female plants, it just vanishes. The whole system looks perfectly balanced, exactly like evolutionary theory would predict.
But, a beautiful idea is just an idea. You need evidence. So the next question was, could you design an experiment to prove that being attractive mainly helps the male side of things and not so much the female side?
Okay, so let's start with the female part of the equation. If you take a flower and make it less attractive, does it struggle to get fertilized? Does it end up making fewer seeds? According to Bell's hypothesis, the answer should be nope. And that is exactly what the data shows. I love this study. Researchers literally took jewelweed flowers and mutilated them to make them less attractive. But just look at the chart. The number of seeds in the ugly flowers is basically identical to the pretty ones, 4.7 versus 4.6. There's no real difference there. Being attractive didn't matter for female success.
This is fantastic confirmation. It suggests the female function just has a pretty low bar to clear. As long as a flower is attractive enough to get at least one pollinator to stop by, adding more bling doesn't help it make any more seeds.
Okay, but what about the other side of the coin? Does being bigger and showier actually pay off when your goal is to get your pollen out into the world?
And the result for the male side is just staggering. Look at this. In experiments on milkweed, the bigger, more impressive flower displays exported 50 times more pollen than the smaller ones. That's not just a small bump. That is a massive evolutionary payoff for being more attractive.
So the final piece of this puzzle comes from what's basically a perfect natural experiment. Plants that have entirely separate male and female individuals. If Bell is right, we should see that the males are the showy ones.
And when you look across the plant kingdom, the pattern is just unbelievably clear. In species that have separate sexes, the male plants consistently have bigger flowers, more flowers packed into a cluster, and more of those clusters all over the plant. They are, to put it simply, the peacocks of the plant world.
And this number right here really drives the whole point home, 7.2 times. Male plants can invest over 7 times more energy into their floral displays than females do.
And that kind of massive investment in advertising only makes sense from an evolutionary perspective if it directly leads to shipping out way more pollen.
So, after looking at all this evidence, we can finally come back to our original question and give it a powerful and kind of surprising new answer.
So, what is a flower? Well, in Bell's own words from his paper, the flower is primarily a male organ designed to procure the export of pollen. It's just a beautifully simple solution to a paradox that had puzzled scientists for decades.
And that leaves us with one last, pretty provocative thought. The next time you're walking through a field of wildflowers, or maybe you get a bouquet of roses, remember what you're probably looking at. Is all that color, all that incredible scent, all that beauty, really just the plant kingdom's most elaborate and successful form of male advertising?